Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name's Andrew and I talk mainly about books and specifically science fiction and fantasy books. And today I'm doing a review, something I'm trying to do more of, and so today I'm going to talk about Ringworld by Larry Niven. This book is the first book of the year that I've read, of 2024. This is the first book I read. And it is the third book I've read by Larry Niven in his Known Space series, which you can see a couple of his books here, Protector and Crashlander, and some of the other sequels to Ringworld. So, yeah, this book was published in 1970. Like I said, it's part of Niven's Known Space series, which is a kind of large, overlapping series of books that are kind of somewhat related. They take place in the same world. There's some character overlap, there's idea overlap, but largely they're kind of, they all work as their own stories, except for direct sequels. Ringworld is probably Niven's most famous book, most well known, and probably most beloved book. And yeah, so today I'm going to talk about what the book's about, what I liked about it, and what I didn't like about it. So, first, what it's about. Like I said, it's in the known space universe, so there's a couple of connections to earlier things like Protector and Crashlander, but they don't really impact the plot. It's more just kind of Easter eggs or kind of aliens that we know exist in those other books too. So this book focuses on a character, a human named Louis Wu, who is celebrating his 200th birthday, and he's very bored with life. Because of kind of certain scientific elements in the book, despite being 200, he's got the body of, like a 30-year-old. And yeah, he's very bored of life, and he goes on these things that he calls sabbaticals, which essentially is whenever he does get bored of people and bored of life, he goes off into the distant corners of known space to explore on his own and away from humanity. And this book follows him essentially being recruited by an alien called a puppeteer, a Pearson's puppeteer, um, to go on a very strange and mysterious expedition to this artifact that the puppeteers have found in space, outside of known space, called the Ringworld. So yeah, the puppeteer recruits Louis Wu, another human named Tila Brown, and another alien called a Kazin, whose name is Speaker to Animals. And together, the four of them, the two humans and the two aliens, go off on this expedition to kind of understand and explore what the Ringworld is. So yeah, that's the rough plot without giving any spoilers or kind of huge plot details. So there's a couple of things I really liked about this book, and they're common with what I liked about Niven's other books, Protector and Crashlander. One of them is the aliens, specifically the puppeteers. I think the Pearson's puppeteers are one of the more interesting alien species I've read. They're this kind of tripedal. They've got three legs, if I'm remembering them correctly. Tripedal species with two long necks and heads that look kind of like snakes. And they're very intelligent, as individuals and as a civilization. But they're mainly categorized or classified by others as cowardly. Because of their intelligence and their intense level of self-preservationism, they're viewed as actually cowardly, and their entire civilization is essentially in migration now, fleeing known space because of an explosion at the galactic core that won't affect anyone for 20,000 years, but the puppeteers are still fleeing, which is something that, to them is very intelligent, but again, to humans and other species is viewed as cowardly. So, the puppeteers are really interesting. The Kazin, less so. They're kind of a typical aggressive, warlike, physically foreboding species. They're essentially bipedal tigers. And yeah, their whole trait is that they're very blunt, very honor bound, and very warlike and aggressive. They've been at war with humanity intermittently for centuries. Um, I found the character Speaker to Animals to have a couple of interesting lines and moments, but overall the species is less interesting than the puppeteers. The other thing that's notable about this book in a great way, and is kind of a staple of the subgenre of hard sci-fi and of Niven, is the science elements, right? The mysteries of the Ringworld, the setup of it, the science of it, the idea of who could engineer this, what type of civilization and technology they would need to be able to engineer something as incredible as this. Those are all really well researched, well written, and make it a really detailed and kind of interesting exploration as you, the reader, get to know more about the Ringworld as well. So if you do like the science aspects, and if you're looking for kind of some unique aliens, it's a really interesting book actually in a lot of ways. As are his other books, right? In Known Space, and also his collaboration with Jerry Purnell, The Mote in God's Eye, which is often considered to kind of be one of the best hard sci-fi books about an alien species. So those are what I liked about the book. Unfortunately, I had a couple major issues with this book that really detracted from my enjoyment of it. The other two books I mentioned, Protector and Crashlander, I actually both really liked, but I think there's two issues I had with Ringworld. And there's a lesser one and then a bigger one. So the lesser one is I think Niven really thrives in shorter stories. So Protector is a novel, but as you can see, maybe it's quite a short novel. It's only about 200 pages, and it feels very tight, very contained. It's got a very straightforward plot, a mystery, and it kind of goes along that track, and it works really well. And Crashlander is a series of short stories, and I think some of them work really well, like Neutron Star and At the Core are two of his most famous, and the two that I really liked. Some of the longer short stories I think get away from him a little bit, and I think that's what happened in Ringworld. I think the plot started to get a little confused and just kind of get away from him. The world seemed to become less tight, less cohesive, and it just started, the pacing started to drag as he got into these new environments. I think his environments work really well in a kind of future extrapolation of humanity's exploration of space. The second they kind of landed on the Ringworld, I found the plot to start to kind of drop a little bit and get a little messy and a little less interesting. So that's my first complaint. My lesser complaint is that the plot kind of got away from him at the end. My bigger complaint, and the one that really detracted from my enjoyment in this book, and it's in the other ones a little bit. I mean, it's there, but in this one, maybe just because it is a longer book, it's about 340 pages, this issue really came up a lot. And that's frankly how Niven writes women. Science fiction has a stereotypical image, especially of this era, of the 60s, 70s, 80s, of being a very masculine, man-dominated genre. And this book is a great example of that and all of the issues with that. So essentially this book, my opinion was that almost every line about or from a woman either infantilized them, sexualized them, or unfortunately both. I found the women in this book to be so painfully one-dimensional, so painfully objectified, and kind of only there in relationship to men, only there for the pleasure of men, or for men to have a great realization or something, right? Like they were so completely for men's eyes and men's actions in the book. I mean, it starts out in ways like, at a party, like kind of throwaway comments about how the main character, Lewis Wu, has slept with almost every woman at this party, including many in that one night, to just being this really terrible tone from Tila Brown, the main kind of woman character in the book, where she is just portrayed as this naive, stupid, frankly, giggly, bubbly, unintelligent character that Lewis is just sleeping with. And that's the whole reason that she came on the expedition. Not the whole reason, but in effect, in how it reads, it really comes across that way, that she is only there to have these kind of juvenile fantasies of this kind of sexy sci-fi exploration, right? So not only were the women written, frankly, terribly, right? I mean, the aliens have more humanity and empathy, or the way he writes, you have more sense of humanity and empathy for the aliens than you do for any of the women in the book. And it's clear that Niven has more empathy and humanity, a sense of humanity for the aliens that he writes than for the human women he writes. So one part is just women being written really poorly in this book. There's two main women characters in the book, and both of them kind of just use every opportunity they can to have sex with the main character, right? Who's this handsome rug. It reads as a self-insert fantasy for Niven. So that's one issue, is that the women are written terribly. The other issue, which I just kind of alluded to, is that there's a lot of sex in this book, which is not a problem. I have no problem with that, obviously. But the way it's written is ridiculous. It's, again, very juvenile, very self-insert for the author, like he's just trying to write a fantasy, and has no relationship to the characters of the plot. There are so many moments in this book where Lewis and Tila will run off to have sex, regardless of what's happening in the plot. Like one of them will have just been injured or something really threatening is about to happen, but they will go by a room that has a bed, and then they're off, right? Or, she wakes up from an injury, and then next sentence they're in the woods, sleeping together. It just read as so juvenile and so much like a fantasy for the author, that it just every page detracted more and more from that for me. So yeah, this book frankly has a lot of sexism in it, and that can partially be explained away as a remnant of that era. But for people who are still reading, I think that's something to contend with. And I would bring up another point, which I finished this book and I, marked it completed on Goodreads, and then I read a couple of reviews on Goodreads. And the first review I read said a lot of what I'm saying right now about the way women are written just being really atrocious. And I was like, great, like it's great to see that I'm not the only one that thought that. And it was a woman that wrote that comment. And then the responses to that comment were just so many men just disrespecting that woman and saying that she doesn't get it, saying that this is why feminism sucks, saying that, just these awful, horrible sexist things about how there's nothing wrong with that, about how that's totally normal, that's okay, and any woman that doesn't get it is a feminist, using that word in a derogatory way, which is ridiculous. And so I think there's a meta element to my enjoyment of this book as well, right? There's a lot to really like in Niven's stuff, and there's a lot to really like in that era of hard sci-fi, right? But there's also such a real reputation it has of being, written by men for men, of including so many explicit power fantasies, of, the objectification and sexualization of women. And that takes away from the reading of the book, but it also takes away from your ability to engage in that book, and engage with that book, in a more meta way, right? Because so many people still adhere to that image as the ideal, the science fiction ideal of this masculine, macho, sexualized power fantasy, essentially. And so I really struggle with that, not only within the narrative, but kind of again, in a meta way. The fandom of this book and of that type of science fiction, I think, is so toxic and so backwards that it really detracts from my ability, at least, to interact with this. So those are my caveats. Those are my issues with this book. And again, if you enjoy the science, if you enjoy that era of science fiction, there is a lot of great stuff in here. But unfortunately, it also has all of the negative parts of that era, of that subgenre. And yeah, it made me walk away feeling just not great about reading Niven, right? Partially for his own words and for the way that fans interact with him. So Niven's got a lot of other books, and you might see that I actually own a lot of them. I will probably continue with at least some of his works that sound interesting to me, but I'm taking them all with a huge grain of salt now, and it's not certain that I'll do all of these. I might do one or two more, and if it's still not clicking, or if these issues persist, then that might be me for Niven. But there is a sequel to this book called The Ringworld Engineers. I will probably give that a try, and I might give some of his other books with Jerry Purnell a try. But yeah, big disappointment, frankly, in Niven's ability to write women, and in the fandom's ability to grow with the genre and engage with, frankly, women. So yeah, that's my review of Larry Niven's Ringworld. Let me know what you thought, if you've read the book, if you agree with me, disagree with me, and yeah, thank you for listening, and I will be back soon with more.